So we continue on down the trail and we came across this beautiful location at the base of this waterfall. It's a great opportunity to show you another app that I love to use called Slow Shutter Cam. So the reason why we use Slow Shutter Cam is because one, it gives us creative control. We can choose any shutter speed we want, from 1 or 2 seconds up to 30 seconds, even beyond that. The other advantage that it gives us much better image quality. So those are the two primary reasons why we use Slow Shutter Cam. So let's take a second and talk about composition. You'll notice I'm sitting down here right on that edge of this waterfall. It's pretty obvious I can't get much closer to this. Now, I am limited in terms of composition a little bit, in terms of framing, because I can't really move around like I can in many other locations. I can't get closer, and if I move back, what's gonna happen is this foreground is gonna come into that frame, and two things are gonna happen. Bringing that foreground to the frame, one, it's not interesting to me. I find it distracting. Two, we have a lot of these leaves and elements that are gonna be blowing in that wind. It's gonna be an issue as you choose longer exposures. Not just that water is gonna be moving, but anything where the wind can affect is gonna be subjected to that motion as well. So moving down lower and closer to this waterfall allows me to mitigate any of that effect of that wind that may have on the flowers or this grass that could be in that foreground. And it also allows me to fill the frame with that waterfall. So given the constraints, I'm actually very happy with this composition. There are also a couple of things that we have to take into consideration when we use this app though. For instance, when we use live photos, we don't necessarily need to be on a tripod. It will work handheld, which is extremely convenient. Using Slow Shutter Cam though, it's pretty much imperative that we want to be locked down on a tripod to get the steadiest shot possible. This becomes more and more important as we get into longer and longer exposures. The other tool that might be useful to have is a remote control. Something that you can get like a Bluetooth trigger that will trigger the remote, or you can even use headphones to trigger the remote. In either case, we want to use something that will let us trigger the camera remotely so we don't have to actually press the phone to trigger the camera. So you'll notice I already have my camera locked down on a tripod. That's step one. Step two is to get a remote release. So what I'm going to use is a pair of headphones today. These come with your phone, so it's not an additional purchase that you have to use, but they really do come in handy. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to plug this into the bottom of the phone. I'm going to open up the Slow Shutter Cam app, go into the settings, and change a few things. By default, they're not set up optimally. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to click on the bottom right-hand corner. You'll see these 3 horizontal lines. Often it's just called the hamburger menu. We're going to press that, and that's going to open up our settings. So let's go through a couple of them. At the very top, we have a self-timer. This actually comes in really handy when we don't have a pair of headphones or a Bluetooth remote trigger. Right now, we're going to use these headphones. Another thing that we want to keep in mind is our photo resolution. By default, it's not optimal, so we're going to click on photo resolution, and we're going to change it to be our maximum resolution, which is going to be 12 megapixels. I'm going to click back into settings, and we're going to go into file format, and we're going to change that as well. And we're going to switch over. By default, I believe it's going to be a JPEG. We're going to switch this over to HEIF, which is going to keep it consistent with the camera app that we use on the phone. All right, so now that we chose the optimal settings, we're going to go ahead and click that gear icon on the bottom left and open up the camera settings. With this on-screen display open, let's go ahead and take a look at some of these options. The first one is our capture mode. We're going to go ahead and choose motion blur. That's going to give us the best effect for this scenario with the waterfall. The second option is our blur strength. What blur strength is going to do is give us the ability to adjust how much blur is going to be in that final result. For this, since we're shooting that waterfall and I want a lot of blur in that water, I'm going to go ahead and choose that maximum effect. Our next option is our shutter speed. So let's talk about shutter speeds for a second. If you're not a photographer, it's actually kind of difficult to grasp what that is. We're all stuck in time. Everything, we live our lives in time. We see in time. We see in a very specific segment of time. The power of shutter speeds is that it allows us to either stretch time or compress time, to capture just a slice of time, to freeze a moment, or to expand time to capture a range of moments. It's a really powerful creative tool that a photographer has in their kit, and this app allows us to take advantage of that. So when I talk about a longer exposure and choosing a long shutter speed, what that will do is actually extend the period of time that we're capturing and recording and showing as a final image. So the final result would be an expanded period of time compressed into a single frame. And it gives us a view of this waterfall that no one could ever see with their naked eye. And part about creating impactful images is showing something that they've never seen or they can never see. So choosing any shutter speed that we want and leveraging the creative control that that provides us really allows us to create an image with maximum impact. So rather than just choosing any shutter speed, let's go ahead and demo some of the shutter speeds so we can actually see what the effect's going to be. The first shutter speed we're going to choose is just 1/8 of a second. That shutter speed is so fast that we're not going to be recording a lot of motion in that water. But let's go capture it and take a look. I'm going to go ahead and click save, and then I'm going to clear. So the next shutter speed I'm going to choose is like a middle of the road shutter speed, around 4 seconds. So I'm going to go ahead and press that volume up button on my shutter. And let's capture that image. Again, I'm going to save, and then I'm going to clear. I'm going to go back into my settings, and I'm going to choose a long exposure. Let's do 15 seconds. And again, I'm going to choose that volume up button to remotely trigger this. I'm going to wait 15 seconds. And what's cool about this, you really can see the entire exposure, the entire image, all of that motion blur develop right in front of your eye. I'm going to go ahead and click save. All right, so now that we captured those images, let's pop open our Photos app and take a look at what we got. The first image we should take a look at is that 1/8 of a second shutter speed, that really fast shutter speed. Like I mentioned before, it's going to capture some motion blur, but not nearly as much as the other two that we chose. So right away we can see when we zoom in a little bit, we do have motion. It's not a static shot anymore. And it's actually not bad. It gives us energy to the scene without blowing out too much detail. But for me personally, it's not enough motion to that scene. Typically when you have water, when you have fast moving water, choosing something at least like 2 or 3 seconds is going to give us a better effect. So let's go to the next image. Here we have our 4-second exposure. So you can tell compared to that first image, having 4 seconds is giving us a lot more motion blur. It's smoothing out that water, it's simplifying the composition, and I prefer this over that first image. Moving on to our last image, that 15-second exposure, it's going to be a little bit harder to tell. It's not as drastic as an effect as that difference between that first and second exposure. The reason is that water is moving so fast. After about 3, 4, 5 seconds, choosing any longer than that, it's not going to be as big of an effect as it will be from shooting just capturing like a still frame or something like 1/4 or of 1/8 of a second. So choosing something in between 3 and 5 seconds may even save you some time. Again, it's all about creative control. You should go ahead and experiment and choose multiple exposures while you're in that scene. Then when you get back later, you can take a look and see which one you prefer. All right, so that's it. As you saw, slow shutter cam really opens up a lot of creative possibilities for us. It's an app that I absolutely love when I come across a scene in landscape photography where I want to introduce a little bit of motion blur into the scene, either to simplify the composition or add just a little bit more dynamic energy to it. So we're going to call this a wrap. We're going to move on to the next location, and let's see what we get.